Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Two World Podcast. I'm one of your co-hosts, Jacob, and I have with me my other co-host, who is...
I am Barney.
And Barney and I are honored today to welcome Meshali Mitchell to the podcast. Meshali is a gifted portrait and lifestyle photographer with a passion for capturing people and their stories in a way that feels both authentic and deeply personal. Her work has taken her across the country, blending artistry with storytelling to create images that resonate. And beyond photography, she's a speaker, a creative who shares messages of faith, restoration, and beauty through her work. And she's now also an author. So, Meshali, welcome to the show.
Thank you, guys. Thank you so much for having me. Like I told you before, it's such an honor to be here with you and love your podcast and all you guys are doing for the kingdom. So it's just such an honor to be here with you.
Oh, our pleasure. Thank you. Meshali, your photography has such a unique and personal feel to it, capturing beauty and deep storytelling. Can you tell us a little bit about what drew you first to photography and how you came to see it as part of your calling, and especially how maybe it connects to your faith and eventually, to your writing?
Sure. That's a great question. Yeah, I always tell people it's funny I was born and raised in a small town in South Arkansas. And so photography, since I was a young girl, really has always been a hobby to me. I've had a love and a passion, a deep passion and love for creativity and the arts. And, being a little girl in Arkansas, you can imagine there was all sorts of natural beauty around me. And so I had a love for the creative arts really from the time I was a little girl. And then through my teen years and college years, the love for photography kind of came on the scene. And this makes me feel really old, but this was before the days that we're in right now of social media. So this was before, MySpace and Facebook and all that. But I just had a love for photography and, storytelling and people and visual beauty. So I fell into this kind of hobby of photography. I always tell people towards the end of my high school years and early college. And the way it all started was I saved up all my graduation money and purchased my very first film camera, like a Canon film camera. And, started there. The Lord really put this deep love for all this in me. And that's kind of how it all began. And at that time, I was basically paying people to take their photos. I was going around basically asking friends, I had this passion and this love and didn't know anyone else that was a full-time photographer, but, had a love for it, was asking people, could I photograph you? Could I photograph you? Could I photograph your family? But kind of building a little portfolio at that time. And that's how everything was birthed. It began as just a sincere love for the arts and for photography. And yeah, the Lord I had a seed planted in my life long ago from a guy that did photography. So it grew from there, and here I am now, years later, still doing it and still loving it. So, but that's where it all began.
You mentioned how when you were young, how you were especially inspired by the nature and the beauty of nature around you. Did you find? But then you mentioned that you quickly turned your portfolio, or eventually turned your portfolio to humans as a subject.
Yeah.
Did you find just you were instinctively drawn to capturing people in their element, or were you initially thinking that you would want to photograph nature more, or if different subjects, or how is it that you decided to focus on people and still do? And
Yeah.
then also, if I can tag another one onto that, how is it that you get such expression out of your subjects that we see on your website?
Well, thank
Just
you.
really captivating photos that you take of people.
Yeah. I think, like I said, it began with just something that the Lord had put in me even as a young girl. I think it's Romans, I'll have to look again, 1 or 8, that talks about us seeing God in creation, us feeling and sensing and seeing Him in all things. So I think even in the beginning, towards the beginning of my life when I was a young girl, even in nature, I could see Him. I could see beauty. Like I said, even going out into the woods of Arkansas, I would feel and sense Him and see Him in the birds and see Him in the trees and feel Him in the wind and all those things. I was wired that way. And the older I got, of course, I nurtured that and it kind of morphed. And then again, it was just kind of how I saw. And I noticed I had that same sense with people. And I felt like I saw him in people and had such a desire, even at a young age, to hear people's stories and, hear all about them. And I saw God in their stories. And then, of course, through photography, I felt like I could capture that. And so that's kinda, from the beginning, that's how that love for I never photographed nature, but that same love I had and that same ability from a young age to see, that, like I said, it evolved into my adulthood, and I began to apply it in these different areas of my life because that's what the kingdom's about, right? Jesus talked about that a lot in the New Testament, seeing past and seeing the kingdom. And so I believe personally that that love was put in me by him at a young age, the ability to kind of see beyond what was into what could be or, see the kingdom in all things. And so that love started there. It was the seed was planted and it just, like I said, it morphed over the years. And then it became, people became my subjects. And yeah, that's how it all began.
I like how you're talking about seeing and this kind of visual element in the spiritual journey. And I wonder if you could talk with us a little bit about one of the huge visuals from your life as you have restored an old farmhouse and how it has
Yeah.
become such a visual centerpiece for your own storytelling and the book that's
Yeah.
coming out that you've written. And could you just walk us through a little bit about how you found yourself in that place and you kind of it dawned on you that there was something deeper to restoring the farmhouse than just the physical work?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I'm talking about how it started as, this love for all of this started as a young girl, and then it morphed into photography. And that was just innate. It was just in me. Well, then this story with this farmhouse began in 2018. It just, the Lord's theme in my life of seeing beyond kind of continued on. And so I came across this old 1800s broken down farmhouse in 2018. I was the long story short is I was single woman, purchasing my first home and had my sights set on something that was already done and ready for me to move in. And the Lord had other plans for me. And I came across this 1800s, rundown farmhouse in Texas. And that kind of kicked into gear, that ability to see beyond. And I, went on site to see it. And it was a house that other people had looked past, they didn't want it, they wanted something newer and shinier, and I walked the grounds and I began to see beyond what was into what could be and should be, and how I say the Lord, I paralleled it a lot, especially, in the book I've written, but began to parallel that and how, the Lord sees us and what could be and should be and not always what is, but how he redeems us and buys us back and restores us. So the the seeing beyond, like I said, continued, and it just morphed again into this old, putting love and loving this farmhouse back to life. And so that journey of the farmhouse started in 2018. And as a photographer, the Lord has kind of merged all my passions, my passion for people, my passion for photography, for writing, and now this home restoration. He's merged all these things, and he's put me in this home. I feel like for such a time as this, to go into each room and gut it and restore it and tell the story of which is the gospel message of restoration and how he goes into all of our hearts. And, I kind of liken it, we as houses, we as living houses, he goes into all of our hearts and he sees beyond what is into what can be and what should be and restores us. And so I talk a lot about the process of that and how it doesn't happen overnight, but his grace in the journey and how he walks us through each room and makes us whole and makes all things new.
Oh, wow.
Interesting how,
Mm.
yeah, how photography is such, like such a visual, art form as it is, and must be
Sure.
very expressive and fulfilling.
Yeah.
Did you feel in this case that this journey was something that just couldn't be expressed only in photography,
Mm.
and that you felt a real need, a real drive to put into
Mhm.
words? Is that how this book came about, that you felt
Yeah.
during this restoration you just had to get it
Yeah.
into words even more than documenting it through photos?
Sure. That is such a great question. I've actually never been asked that, and I've actually never thought of that, but yes, I do feel like I came into a place in my life because this book, I talk about it a lot. It's so personal to me. It's my story I've lived out. It's the story I'm currently living. It involves the restoration of this home. It involves my photography, my words, all of it, all of me. It was just such a labor of love. I poured my heart and soul into it. And the Lord and I, He started it and finished it, but we both worked together to accomplish it. But yeah, that's such a good question. I did. I felt like this book was gonna take more than just photography. I do feel like the photography tells a story and gives a depth to the book that the words, alone wouldn't have given, but I think that this book required all of it, all of me. I think it required, images that told stories paired with words, and, yeah, I think this book kinda took me in a new trajectory, and it required a little more. And so, yeah, and it's been interesting. I just saw the book comes out in April, and we're in the middle of, like, the printing process. It's my first book, so it's just been such an interesting process. And I saw the book for the first time the other day, the images inside, and my heart just kind of skipped a beat because, like you said, it was not just photography, but it was words, and it was my story from childhood all the way to now. And so, the book's very weighty for me, as you can imagine. And, I just pray it blesses people. I pray the photography speaks to people in interesting and unique ways, and I pray the words do as well, so
Michelle, when you were talking earlier about your your thoughts through the restoration process of the house, you ended your statement with that quote from the book of Revelations, "Behold, I make all things new."
yes.
And it was making me think a little bit about this sermon that I heard by this contemporary theologian, Miroslav Volf, where he said, sometimes we can approach the future almost as though it's the sum of things that have happened in the past. But really, when God is involved, he gives us something fresh and new that isn't based off of just the sum result of past experiences, but it can be something totally unique and new. And so
Yeah,
I guess I'm kind of wondering as you've
I
gone
love
through
that. I
this.
got chills when you said that, sorry. It was all
Oh, no,
it's
it's
great,
fine. It's
great.
also I have a very personal story related to this verse that I wanna share later, but just to follow
Yeah,
through on this question, how has your understanding of God shifted or been reaffirmed or, inspired, invigorated through this process of restoring this home? How
yeah,
have you grown in your understanding of God's heart and who God is
yeah.
in this process?
Yeah, it's taught me so much about, I would say, grace. I was raised in church, so I was raised in ministry. I've always been raised in the ways of the Lord, around the ways of the Lord, but I realized through the process at this home and the home journey, and especially living in the home as a perfectionist, while it's not fully done, it's always, I tell people, evolving. I'm always restoring something in the home. I'm never gonna walk outside with a big red bow and say, "Ta-da, it's restored, we're done," you know? There's always something evolving, there's always something growing and healing and mending and changing, and I'm living in the home in the middle of all that, and so the actual physical restoration of the house and me working with my hands and working on this project with the Lord, as I said before, it's paralleled so much, and he's taught me so much about myself and my heart in this journey, and the process of sanctification, and the process of healing, and the process of mending, and what that looks like in our spiritual journeys. I'm from the Pentecostal and charismatic faith tradition. That's how I was raised, and really what I'm a part of now, and love it. But I always say we put heavy emphasis on moments. We put heavy emphasis on, church services and moments and healing and things there, and that's beautiful, and that I fully believe the Lord can accomplish healing in a moment, but a lot of times he chooses a process, and so this house has slowed me down. It's taught me to see the beauty in process, and areas of my heart that have needed healing. Some of those that I thought were irreparable, he's brought full healing to me through a process of restoration. And so I've learned so much about his grace, so much about his mercy and his patience through working on this home. And that's coming, like I said, from a recovering perfectionist. I want things done a certain way and I want them done right now. So that's what I'd say. I've learned so much. That's probably what I've learned, what sticks out the most to me right now.
Yeah, I wonder, and this, I don't know if this is something that you want to share, or maybe it's something that you can even quite put your finger on, but throughout this whole process, have you had, or how many have you had moments where you're just kind of, I guess, dumbstruck, like where you really have felt, God's grace, like really distinctly, tangibly, during this process, and like something like really became clear, and you had a moment of clarity,
Yeah.
that thanks to the Lord through this. Can
Yeah.
you name one or two that happened,
Yeah.
through this?
Yeah, from the beginning, I mean, even me finding the home and when I began to really sense the Lord as I began to in the beginning early days, begin restoring each room, I got a strong sense of even the Lord's power and sovereignty in putting me specifically, like I said, me specifically with my gifts and wirings and my story in this home. I began to have a really strong sense. But there are constant lessons that he's taught me that I've had these like aha moments with him, even through actually physically restoring the home. And those have been pretty continual in my healing process, just lessons he's taught me that have happened really since the beginning. And I tell people they're still happening. They're still happening even today in him showing me things through the actual physical restoration of this home. And I talk about a lot of those in the book. I share like specific stories of thought patterns I had and different things where his Holy Spirit, in this house began to show me and give me real revelation, things he was doing in my heart and restoring my soul. And so yes, to answer your question, I've had a lot of those
Yeah.
a lot of those moments. And it took a whole book for me to really break that down. And that's one of the beauties of the book too, is I kind of give specifics and examples of how the Lord's like specifically spoke to me in areas in my healing journey.
I'm noticing in the background what seems to be an early pre-production copy of your book. Can we
Yeah,
ask about the cover? Is it okay to talk? Yeah.
absolutely. Oh,
Can
I'd
you
love
can
to
you
talk
bring it a little
about it.
closer to the
Sure,
camera?
sure. Yes. No, I'll have to say this. This is one of the copies that I have actually not seen the actual official book inside yet. It's still in print and it's on its way over right now, launching April 15th. But this is the official cover. So I don't know if you guys can see it clearly.
Yes. Oh,
Is
it's
Mhm.
that pretty
great.
clear?
It's great.
Yeah. So this is the home. We did a kind of a classic just sketch. And then we did the words here in gold. I chose green on purpose because I love that symbolism of life and healing and wholeness. And yeah, and I loved the gold foil letters, and Lisa Harper did the forward for me, and
Wow.
so really
Nice.
excited about that. Yeah.
Can we ask about the subtitle as you're holding it up
Yeah,
there?
sure.
Partnering with God in transforming our broken places.
Mhm.
The idea of partnership, I'm kind of wondering, can you unpack that for us? Is it like us giving what we can give? Is it in this case? Is it the
Yeah,
physical work you were doing with the house is what you could do, and then God infused the grace into your life as you did it, or is it like a
sure.
spiritual action as well that you're
Yeah,
doing?
yeah. Partnering with God, I always say, is us doing God begins the work in us, and partnering with God is us doing what we can do, us being obedient to Him and doing what we can do, and it's Him doing what we could never do. And so, partnering with God in our restoration process, like I said, I come from that charismatic Pentecostal tradition. And a lot of times I had been guilty of just standing in the altar and asking the Lord to do XYZ and heal me and restore me. But I would walk away with these areas of my heart that were broken that I knew I needed healing in. I knew I needed to let Him in fully and do the practical things, partner with the Word and live that out. I was I tell people I was really good at Christianese. I could quote scriptures to you. I was in church every Sunday, but there was something in me. I would look around and I thought of John 10:10, the thieves come to steal, kill, and destroy, but I've come to give you life and life more abundantly. And for years, even as a believer, that abundant life, for some reason, when I was really honest with myself and I laid my head down on my pillow at night, that abundant life felt very foreign to me. And I asked the Lord, why does this abundant life that I see others walking in feel foreign to me? This fruit of the Spirit, love, joy, peace, all those things, that abundance of soul. I want that. And so partnering with God was me letting Him into those areas. And I began to really partner with Him in reading His Word and applying His Word and doing what it says. And I began to see fruit in my life from that. I began to walk closely with community. I began to partner with Him in vulnerability with, strong believers that were around me that I trust so that they could speak into my life and I could share with them. Things like that, that He requires partnership with us, in this spiritual journey that we're on, and especially in our healing and wholeness and vibrancy of spirit. Like I said, I would stand and just ask Him for those things, and He was really willing and ready to give those things to me, but there was a part to play, that I was responsible for in that. And so when that shifted in my life, I began to see real healing and real transformation.
Kind of still focusing on the subtitle a little bit.
Yeah.
Jacob and I, we often, after each episode, we often take a few moments or even a few days to kind of think of a title and then a subtitle for our episodes.
Yeah.
And they often come about, through cooperation and through realizing the themes within the episode and whatnot. I noticed that you have partnering with God in transforming our broken places. Did that the use of the pronoun our, did that come after the book was finished and you realized, wow, this is much more than just my story? This journey that I've been on is completely relatable to so many different people out there that it feels right to use our. Um
Yeah.
or was part of your inspiration for this book thinking, I've got to take this experience that I've had and share it with people so that they can really gain from what I've gone through?
Yeah. I'd say kind of all of the above. We were about halfway through writing it when we solidified the title and the
Mm.
subtitle, and I was sharing on Instagram and my social media platforms. I was just gutting the house and restoring and sharing as I went, and I was receiving so many messages of how the book, or not the book, I'm sorry, but the post and what I was sharing, restoration, that word was resonating so loudly with people. People are wanting restoration and desiring that, and I say in our world more than ever. Right now, it's a heart cry. It's like the earth is crying out for restoration and healing. So as I began to get those messages and see and kinda sense that felt need of people, and again, I was writing and we were the writing process, I was active in that. But yes, I would say to the writing team, this restored isn't just my story, but this is all of our stories. I was seeing that felt need, and in sharing my story, my testimony, people were seeing themselves and their story in my story. And so that's a huge, I'm glad you asked that question, because that was a really big heart cry for me, is that when people read this story, they don't just see me in it and my story, but they see themselves and the restoration work God is doing in their lives in the book. So I'm so glad you asked that, because we were very intentional about the title and the subtitle. That's a great question.
I have two directions I want to go. One is to
Yeah,
piggyback on Barney's last question, but the other one is just to return for a moment to the cover, if that's okay.
I love it.
Yeah, the tree that's in front of the
Oh,
house
yeah.
in real life, is that drawing to scale? Would that tree look pretty much like that in terms of its size by the house?
Yes, uh-huh, yep, there's
Because
a huge oak tree and 2 pine trees, but that picture specifically is the big established oak tree that's in the
okay,
front yard, so yeah.
okay. I don't know why, but for me, when I see that by your home, it feels like it has its own rich symbolism or meaning, and I don't
I
know
love
if
that.
that's intentional or not, but I'm just thinking of, like, the tree as a representation, and it can be of our life, like in Psalm 1, we can
Yeah,
be planted like a tree and flourish, and so is there a way in which the tree
so
on the
good.
is part of the story? I mean, you're not restoring the tree, but just its presence by the house is like another layer
Yeah.
of meaning?
Goodness, I love these questions are awesome. I love this. I've never been asked that either, and I love that. Honestly, the sketch was originally drawn by a friend of mine. It's kind of evolved over the years too. We perfected it for the cover, but really it was just a visual of the home from that angle. And there's a huge oak tree, very established oak tree in the front and 2 established pine trees. But I do reference that in the book. I talk about a conversation with a friend I had one day when I was running, and they texted me and said had this thought, we were talking about faithfulness, and they said to me, "Miss Shaylee, the oak tree is already in the acorn." If you think about it, there's an oak tree that's already in the acorn, but it takes planting and watering and nurturing and years and time and seasons for these oak trees to be established and grow. And so I absolutely love that because we do talk a little bit about that in the book. We talk about slow growth and faithfulness and being established and rooted. And so I have never thought of that, but I'm gonna steal that from you and use that now
Yeah.
because it's just so good. It's just so good because even the tree, like you said, preaches its own message. Because, yeah, it's a huge oak tree that sits outside the house and almost kinda just comes over the house in the yard. And,
Mm.
so I love that question.
Oh, that's great. And to follow up on Barney's
Yeah,
question, as you're talking about connecting your story with other people's stories, how would you advise people who are facing unexpected challenges in their own lives as they would seek to move forward in their journey of restoration? Is there some advice or
yeah,
guidance that you would extend to them?
sure. I would say just to remember that what God starts, He finishes. There are days in this house and in this journey still that I have harder days, so I don't wanna ever present myself as, I've done this work here and, like, again, I'm restored and we're gonna tie a big red bow. Until heaven, we're all on these journeys of restoration. We're all being perfected and made new. So I would say grace, grace, grace. If somebody's in their restoration, process and you feel stuck or you feel, you know, disheartened or hopeless, there are things I talk about in the book practically. Like, I think I mentioned this earlier. Some of the ways I got unstuck, and I know that my healing process isn't necessarily, I say this, like, the blueprint for everyone to use, but in me sharing my healing journey, I pray other people could kinda get insights from it. But one of the ways I got unstuck at the very, very beginning is I had some pretty deep issues from my childhood that I just could not let go of, and I hated to admit that, but it just kept me kinda bound. I had some strongholds in my thought processes, and I was dealing with anxiety and depression. So I began to really, like I said, let that was a huge key for me, let people in. I began in my mid-20s, I was kind of bleeding out in my relationships and just like I said, my thought patterns and just wasn't living that abundant life. And personally, I began to see a Christian counselor, and that process alone for me jump started some real healing in my life. Now, it's been a journey, but letting her in to some of those rooms, that I talk about of my heart that were so locked tight and closed up. And like, again, even as a believer. So remember, I was a believer, but not living that victorious, abundant life and had these rooms that I had really closed up, locked up, threw away the key. And she, it's the power of the body. She sat with me and really didn't let me stay there. She,
Mm.
told me the Lord. I remember our first session, I began to share things with her that I needed to talk about so bad that I was carrying things were so heavy. And I began to share things with her and just began to weep. And I talk about in the book how I laid my head down on the desk. I remember and I saw tears drip down on the wooden desk onto my jeans and just began to share my heart. And I felt the sense of the Holy Spirit and I felt his love. And I looked up at her and I said, I expected to be condemned and I expected to be reprimanded, or I don't know really what fully I was expecting, but she said to me, "The Holy Spirit is about to start a healing work in your life, Miss
Mhm.
Shaylee, and he's gonna do heart surgery on you. This is probably gonna be painful and it's gonna take a process. It's gonna take resources but this partnership with him, you're about to experience full healing in your heart." And I talk about in the book again, like that jump started this like healing process in my life. So that and, great Christian counseling, great community where I actually let people into my life.
Mm.
I began to invite trusted friends that I knew walked closely with the Lord into these areas of my heart. So, there's even scripturally, there's healing happens. It says in the book of James, healing happens when you confess your faults one to another, not just to the Lord, but, confess your faults one to another so that healing may come. So I began to walk in that and partner with God in that. And, there are an array of other things. I won't keep you here all day, but, you know, I would say to someone in that place, it is gonna take partnership on your part. Just keep moving forward. Grace, grace, grace. And kind of take inventory of your life and kind of the steps you're taking practically with the Lord to, move forward right now.
I'm thinking about the the content of the book itself, and kind of still thinking of the theme of what Jacob mentioned of the oak tree, and that relation to that he connected with Psalms 1. And I wonder, how was it that that you found the biblical passages that you incorporated into your book? Were there some that you just knew that you had to be in the book, or were there others that, as you're in the moment, a piece of scripture came to mind and you thought, wow, that really just sums up what we're at. You got to make sure to get that
Yeah.
into the book.
Yeah, there were some scriptures that I had in my heart, kind of in my heart and soul from the beginning, but really, Barney, as we wrote the book, as each chapter kind of took shape, the Lord began to not audibly, but just I had this sense of different scriptures that would work here and different teachings that would work here. And a lot of that was about, process and the Lord's process
Mm,
and sanctification and bringing us into this place of restoration in our lives. So the scriptures, and I will say this, I had a great publishing company team. I worked with an editing team. So some of that was a team effort. As I began to share my story, I was surrounded by such great kingdom people and professionals, and we all just kind of worked together and scriptures began to flow and come to us. And that was a really fun part of the journey, I'd say, was working with them and pulling them into my story. And that's kind of how all the scriptures that we ended up placing in the book came to be.
mm,
I feel like your story really shows that community makes a difference, and having people in your life that can speak into your life in a helpful way is transformative. And this counselor that you
Absolutely.
were working with, and you even later, as you're working with the publishing team, how they help tell the story. But can
So
you
good.
talk a little bit about the importance of empathy, and how if you go through a period of suffering and then you find healing, how does that impact one's own sense of empathy towards other people who are going through similar struggles? And how
Yeah.
would you talk about like the need for us to be empathetic as
Yeah.
Christians for other people, or just people
mm,
in general that we see in our lives who are struggling?
Yeah. That's good. Well, we try to avoid pain and suffering at all costs. But I always say pain and suffering change us. The pain and suffering, any that I've experienced in my life, and some of this that I talk about in the book, I always say I would not be the person I am today if the Lord had just rescued me and delivered me immediately out of any pain or suffering,
mm,
I wouldn't be able to tell the story today and the ministry that I wouldn't have the ministry overflow that I have right now if it wouldn't have been for pain and suffering. And I would say I love the empathy question because it's definitely changed me in that department. It's given me more empathy for people that are walking out their journeys of healing because healing takes time, and I think sitting in someone's seat or being in their shoes, when you look at it from that through that lens or that perspective, It just gives you an empathy. I know for me it has that you wouldn't have unless you had walked through it. So in a sense now, I don't regret anything. I'm grateful for the pain and the suffering, even that, through my younger years that I went through, because the Lord really has made all things new. And I always say in biblical restoration, He gives you, when He restores something to you, He gives you back more. And so now I'm not just healed and whole, but there's an overflow happening and I'm able to help others, through the story. And so pain and suffering has somehow only through the kingdom, but it served me well. So yeah, but it's definitely, to answer your question, built, I would say, a deep empathy in me for others that are walking this path and walking this journey. And I hope they sense that and feel that. That's actually something I address in chapter 1. I hope they sense that and feel that as they're reading the words, that they feel the Lord's love and compassion, wash over them. And so, yeah.
If I may, I love what you're saying there, and I wanna turn the metaphor just a little bit of the house that you
Yeah.
talked about restoring and apply it now in a slightly different way, and as you're talking about the value of community in our lives there, sometimes scripture talks about the gathered community as like a house that God is building and
Yes.
renewing that house. And how can the empathy that you're talking about there also help us navigate the differences that we have with people? And I think,
Mm.
not to get into too many specifics here, but this is a time of intense polarization
Yeah.
in our country and in our world where the differences can be lightning rods for division and like, but how can a posture of empathy, if you've come through hardship and you found healing and you're seeking after renewal, how can it also be transformative in a community? And how can
Yeah.
people have, you know, empathy towards one another and graciousness? I mean,
Mm.
I don't know if you have any words of wisdom, but I'm sensing
Yeah.
that you would for
Yeah.
this.
I heard a podcast the other day on, it really ministered to me, but it was just on the art of listening. And I thought about our culture and how much would change if we would just sit around tables and stop talking and just listen to someone, sit and make eye contact in a world that's fast moving and social media, crazy, and how much life would change and our culture would change if we would just sit at tables together and break bread together and look across the table and see ourselves in each other's stories. How much empathy would come if we would just stop and listen to someone. And so that's kind of what, as you were talking, I thought about. So maybe that's for someone. I thought about that podcast I recently heard. And it's something I'm trying to get better at in my life, is just even in my day to day, outside of all these podcasts and ministry stuff and book stuff, with my own family and friends and community and anyone the Lord's putting in my path. The world needs healing, the world needs restoration. We need a balance, a healthy balance of truth and grace. We need to, like, kinda slow down and see our stories in each other's stories and sit and just look at each other and listen. And again, that's something I'm working on. I don't wanna be preachy to people. That's something I'm working on in my life right now, because even as I've written the book, I've gotten just a healthy dose of just this strong sense and burden of the world is crying out for healing. I mean, like you said, there's so much polarization and arguing, and there's so much noise. And if we, in our own spaces, in our own homes, in our own places that God has put us, would just listen and hear, like I said, put down the phones, look in each other's eyes, and hear each other's hearts. I think we would begin to see each other in a fresh way.
Yeah, that's so powerful. Thank you for sharing that. That means a lot.
Sure.
Mhm.
Yeah, it helped me. It was something that, like I said, that I heard the podcast and the Lord, it just kinda stayed in my heart all day. I just meditated on it. It was like the Lord it just stayed right here, and I asked the Lord, "Lord, I wanna be a good listener. I wanna whoever you put in my path today, the grocery, the cashier, the family, whoever, I wanna be a good listener, and I wanna love people through listening, and I wanna walk with a heart of empathy and care." And and I'm always asking him to give me a healthy balance of truth and grace as I talk to people, and because I know both are necessary. So that's a journey. It's interesting you ask that, because that's a journey that I'm walking and I'm asking the Lord to perfect in me daily.
Yeah, I'm curious now that that the process is in restoring the home is moving along much more,
Yeah.
and the book is out. And what do you think that you will be inclined to writing more books or more lengthy installments, or do you think that you will just wait and see, or are you going to kind of start focusing much more on photography again, or what
Yeah.
kind of projects do you think lie ahead for you?
Yeah. I pray so. It was a gritty process for me, a long process writing this first book, but I do feel a calling to, prayerfully, if the Lord has this for me, write more. We're kind of in talks right now of even beginning a next book,
Mm,
which feels surreal to say because this first one has been such a beautiful process, but it took everything, all heart and soul for me, to pour my pages into this book behind me. And it was a true labor of love and an offering to the Lord, and I view it as a seed planted in the earth, but, yeah, I do hope and pray to write another one and another one and another one. I had a lot of fun, and it grew me. It grew me like nothing else has in a long time, and so I pray to, and I'm still doing photography. People ask that a lot. You just kind of alluded to that. I am still doing photography full
mm,
time and
mm.
traveling with that. I'm just not able to do as much because this book season is taking a lot of my time right now. But yeah, I don't know what's on the horizon. It's a whole new, truly, it's a whole new walk of faith. We go from glory to glory. And again, I don't tie a big red bow and go, okay, I'm done. I've arrived. I've done everything. It's like the Lord's calling me into a new season now of life's changing again. This is new for me. So I'm having to trust the Lord in a whole new way right now through this. And so, but yeah, so that's a rabbit trail way to answer your question. But I do pray to write another one. So we'll see what the Lord has.
One thing that I would love to ask too is here at the end, you were saying how you poured your whole self into this book, your experiences and your thoughts and your photography, your writing, like all the things that you had available to you. And what's so fascinating to me about that is the kind of integration of the different parts of yourself into like a common expression. And our
Yeah,
podcast is in a lot of ways about the theme of integration, the idea of two worlds coming together, like Barney in one culture, living in one culture, and then I'm living in another. And we talk about that a lot, intercultural things. But like a lot of other aspects of life, we talk about coming together and how rich that can be if we let that happen, if they're not
yeah.
segregated. So, is there anything that you might say to maybe aspiring authors or people who want to do something with their creativity or just live a more integrated life about how you navigated the different parts of yourself and brought them together in a way that seemed to produce something really special?
Yeah. So I always tell people when they ask me that, it's funny, I don't really have a blueprint for people. I feel like we're all called I kind of live by this sense. I think we're all called to pioneer something because we're all unique. There's not another Meshali out there, for instance. So this journey as I've followed the Lord day by day and how everything's become integrated, it's very unique to my calling and what the Lord's put me in the earth for. So I just encourage the creatives that you were mentioning, aspiring authors or creatives. This has been a journey for me of just following the Lord day by day. There's so much of what I'm living in now that I had a deep desire for, but I never saw coming. I had no blueprint for how the Lord was going to get me there. It was just a day by day, again, partnering with him, listening to him, letting him guide me. Again, saying yes to photography. This season, that season, the trajectory changed. I said yes to a farmhouse that he brought across my path. He began, through those things and me saying yes, he began to merge these passions, which is so amazing to me. He's just so sovereign and amazing, and it's just amazing. It's so cool. But yeah, there's no blueprint other than partnering with God and every day, each and every day saying yes to what he has for you that day. And it's amazing what he does. And like you said, integrating things and merging things. And I never in a million years thought I would be living in an old farmhouse restoring it and writing a book about it and, so, yeah. So it's a journey of following the Lord day by day and saying yes. And sometimes that's very scary, I have to add that, but
I had 2 more things I'm gonna ask, but I wanna make sure I give Barney a chance. Is there
Sure.
anything you wanted to follow up on there, Barney, before I jump in with something else?
Oh, yeah. No, just one thought that came to mind for a while here, and I'm not sure how well you know this, but I grew up in a home that was built in 1840,
Get out,
and
that's
yeah,
awesome.
yeah,
How
and
cool.
it had all kinds of quirky things like horsehair plaster and other, draftiness in general, and
Yes.
whatnot. But it,
Yeah.
for years and years, we used just a wood burning stove to keep it going. But
Yeah,
how well do you know the story of the house and its history that you're in now, and what kind of unexpected things did you find in it during this
yeah.
process?
Well, that list is a mile long too, but part of the story that I value and really hold so dear is I actually am the first person to own this home. It's an 1886 farmhouse. I'm the first person to own the home outside the family line.
Oh, wow.
So which was so I mean, I just consider that such an honor. So it was a very loved farmhouse, very cherished by this family, but it just had become run down over the years and, they kept it but lived different places but I actually became the precious woman who sold the home to me. It was so cool, was a believer, and so she's since I purchased the home, went to heaven, but she and I connected and her whole family, I mean, I've talked to several of them and they're amazing people, but I've learned a lot about the history from them, which has been such a gift, and so that part of the story I love that there was a connection there with us, and she loved before she went to heaven, she would write me and she would say, "God's pulling off in Ephesians 3:20." He's doing more. I knew that there was ministry yet to be done in this home, and she said, "When I sold it to you, I felt like it wasn't quite accomplished. I just had this sense of," and she's like, "I just feel like he's pulling off in Ephesians 3:20." So she really blessed the work. I knew how much she loved the home and how special it was to her, and she blessed the work, and that just meant so much to me. So I had, a lot of that has been so special to me. But yes, moving into the home, 1800s homes, old homes are so quirky, like you said. So there has been a lot of different things I've like come across and even the contractors as they worked, room to room.
Oh, yeah.
Oh man, we always say we start a job that we think is going to be easy, but we get behind the walls and we'll just call them surprises. There's always a little surprise. So the job takes a little longer than we expected, but yeah, it's been a fun journey and it's taught me so much. I mean, spiritually, emotionally, practically, I've learned even on the practical side, I've learned so much about homes and things I never in a million years thought I would know, but like you said, I think you mentioned, like, wood burning stove, and it's got an awesome, like, wood burning fireplace that's got a fire in it right now, and I'm a lover of old homes and, like, good character. That's kinda what I'm drawn to, so it's full of that, and there's constant projects for me here, which is good for me, so I'm loving it. I'm loving it.
Yeah, I wanted to share an affirmation for something I heard in your story that I can really relate to, that I think is really important, and that is how you talked about the new insight you had as you grew up in your faith and owned it more, from going from maybe a expression of faith that was maybe a little bit episodic, or you had these intense experiences
Mhm.
maybe Sunday to Sunday or from time to time, but like the daily lived reality wasn't always there. And
Yeah.
I can really relate to that. I grew up in a charismatic tradition as well, in the Vineyard Church,
Oh,
and
yeah. Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
and now I actually serve as a pastor in a Mennonite congregation,
Okay.
and I love both, and I value my time in both communities.
It's
But
beautiful.
one thing I'll say is that what I appreciated about the Mennonite expression of faith is this kind of emphasis on daily discipleship, lived out, practical expression, and daily simple tasks, like the sanctification of time, and work. And that's a great compliment to the charismatic, expressive, experiential realities of these unique experiences that come from time to time. But if it can work its way into a daily expression, a rhythm,
I
and I've
love
heard
it.
that in your story, and I wonder if that's part of, talking about integration. What brings things together is that willingness to let it press into all of lived life, not just moments. And
Yeah.
but I really like that, and I can relate. But the second thing I
So
wanted to come,
beautiful.
thank you. I wanted to come back to that quote from Revelations that you shared earlier, and if I may just share a brief personal story, which is kind of like my own testimony to give as a witness to what you're saying in your book.
I love it.
Yeah. So in 2014, my mother passed away after a long journey with cancer. And a month before she passed away, well, leading up to her death, we had a third child coming, and she knew it was possible that she would live to see this child, but she also knew it was possible that she wouldn't. And she died just 1 month before our youngest daughter was born. And so I remember at my daughter's birth being so happy, but still having the sadness because I just lost my mom. And then I went home to get a few items, was driving back to the hospital, and I was coming down this hill in my car. I had this vision, and I heard God speak to me these words from Revelations 21. And I saw this image of my parents smiling. Both of them had gone on by this point. I could see them like
Mm,
in my mind's eye, it was like they were in heaven smiling down at me. And I heard these words, "Behold, I make all things new." And I started
mm,
weeping, and I felt like in that moment, God was saying, like, "You have had this loss, and but look, like, a new life has entered your family, and through the birth of your young daughter, Hannah, I will bring
mm,
restoration and healing." And it
mm,
was so true, like, that moment was so healing, and, it points back to that reality of God's restoration that your book,
mm.
I think, is celebrating that God sees us in our pain and can meet us there and can restore to us what we've lost. And so when you said that quote, I thought, "Oh my goodness, if there's time, I really just want to share that particular scripture means so much to me in this theme of
And
restoration." Yes.
that blesses me so much. It brings tears to my eyes, and I love that you said you just like, you're bearing witness to none of our stories are exactly the same. We're living out our own journeys with the Lord, but they bear witness to each other. What I'm saying, you saw yourself in my story, and you're like, "This is true. This is what I've experienced," and so it's such a beautiful testimony. It brings tears to my eyes hearing you talk about it. I'm so grateful you shared
Thank
that.
you.
So
Thank you.
grateful.
Thank you.
Yeah, yeah, and that's the beauty of it too is that, while we're until we're in heaven, I always say while we're earthside, we do what you just said. We live in that tension of restoration and grief, healing, and then still these living in the earth, this pain and grief and suffering. So until heaven, we're walking that journey. But that's so beautiful, so beautiful.
Thank you. Is there anything else that either of you would like to share before we close our time?
You guys have been so wonderful, and you've asked such amazing questions. I've enjoyed it. It's blessed me so much doing this interview. So thank you so, so much for having me on.
Mhm. Yeah, and we would especially like to thank you for giving us so much of your time today. Um,
Honored.
I'm just so surprised how quickly all of this time has gone by because it's just been such a wonderful time talking with you today and learning so much about the
Oh,
journey you've been on and about this book. And boy, it's so exciting to think of having the chance to read it ourselves later,
Oh,
coming out April 15. And so we want to again thank Meshali Mitchell for joining us today. And we want to thank all of you out there and to remind you that the book that's coming up is Restored, Partnering with God in Transforming Our Broken Places. But probably you listening with us today are thinking, it's not just restored, but it is still being restored,
that's right.
it's such a process. And we are just so thankful again for you listening with us. And we hope that you are looking forward to the next episode and looking forward to the book as well as we are. And so for my co-host Jacob and our very special guest, Meshali Mitchell, I am Barney, and this has been the Two World Podcast, and we will see you all again next time.